Welcome all to my paranormal closet where the stories and magic take place. George Adamski was a Polish-American author who became widely known in ufology circles after he displayed numerous photographs in the 40s and 50s that he said were of alien spacecraft. He claimed to have met with friendly Nordic alien space brothers and claimed to have taken flights with them to the moon and other planets. Today's guest is here to discuss George Adamski and how the man was essentially systematically robbed of his credibility. He wrote a book on the subject matter. Please join me in welcoming Gerard Aartsen to today's show. Welcome, Gerard.
Thank you, Eleanor. It's a pleasure to be here.
I interview a lot of people and have come across this many times before. It seems to be something that happened quite often where people are discredited, vilified, or called conspiracy theorists and such. But over time, when the truth finally does come out, they're redeemed, but often it's long after they're dead and buried and can't appreciate the deserved recognition. What prompted you to write a book about this?
It was actually in 2009 that I started writing articles by George Adamski because I found information that obviously was available somewhere, but disconnected. These were pieces of information in isolated places, and when I started to connect them, a very interesting picture emerged of this unique character and the first American contactee to step forward with his accounts of meeting people from space. That led to me writing my first book in 2010, also about George Adamski. George Adamski, a herald for the Space Brothers. I'm currently preparing a new edition, revised and enlarged. But the book that we're here to discuss today, the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, was written to present information that shows that he was correct all along, or at least that he was correct about some of the most fundamental aspects of the UFO phenomenon and the extraterrestrial the reality of the extraterrestrial presence on Earth. Because over the course of, say the last 12 years, several facts have been confirmed by the military, by science. People will remember how the Pentagon finally had to admit in 2020, only 3 years ago, that video recordings of what they call unidentified aerial phenomena were indeed authentic and unexplained, and were capable of incredible maneuvers that none of the known terrestrial craft are capable of. I decided that it was time to correlate these confirmations with statements that George Adamski and photographs that George Adamski had made since the 1950s. And for me, it amounts to a very powerful rehabilitation of this man's reputation. You were right in saying that many times people have been discredited, but what happened to George Adamski is probably unique in the sense that he was derided, he was vilified in so many ways. It's fair to speak of character assassination in his case, and it's indeed not the first time. Anyone who comes forward with revolutionary insights or ideas is subjected to that kind of ridicule and derision. A very, very well-known example, for instance, that listeners may be familiar with is Helena Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society in the late 19th century, and who was investigated in her time, and a report was published in 1885 condemning her as a fraud. And no less than a century later, the same report was fully retracted by the organization that had commissioned it a century earlier. So, whenever revolutionary ideas or insights or experiences are presented to the public, it takes time for the public to get our heads around, to wrap our heads around it. And
it
for
also
science,
doesn't necessarily always fit the agenda either. If it doesn't fit the agenda, they don't want to think outside the box.
Well, especially in the case of extraterrestrial visitors, absolutely.
Well, I know that some would argue it's not necessarily aliens. It could be earthlings from the future. I've heard that discussion come up. And then I've also heard that they don't want to release too much information, though the government knows much of it is real. They don't want to release it because they're afraid that there might be recreation of the debacle with Orson Welles and the War of the Worlds back in our past.
Yes, that's been a concern, I suppose, and that's been a rationale that's been given. And if that is a real concern, then the government or the military has themselves to blame for something like that happening, because they were the ones who created the confusion and the fear among the public in the first place, in response to first of all, the space visitors introducing themselves through being sighted, to allowing their craft being sighted on worldwide around the globe, in response to visitors contacting individuals around the globe, not just in California, not just in the United States, but around the globe, and people coming forward like George Adamski to relate their experiences and share the message they were given by these extraterrestrial visitors. And when this was in the 1950s, mind you, at the height of the Cold War, with the United States and the Soviet Union at loggerheads, with the palpable threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over the whole world. And these extraterrestrial visitors, according to George Adamski, but also Buck Nelson, Truman Bethune, Howard Menger, and Daniel Fry, and many others, they exhorted us, they pleaded with us to give up our tendency to settle our conflicts through war, and rather seek international cooperation to prevent nuclear destruction. And of course, when a government, and it's not just the United States government, but also the Soviet government at the time, and the British government and the French government, when they rely on the public's support for the massive investments in the development of nuclear weapons, this message was, and it was gaining popularity. There was a growing interest in this message that was given by the contactees. That was a major cause for major concern among the authorities. So that's when the actual disinformation campaign was set into motion to scare and confuse the public. So that's really on the authorities. If they were afraid of, or if that's their rationale for not sharing what they know. I think they haven't been sharing what they know because they don't want to give up what they see and sense as their duty to defend national borders. Whereas the space visitors are telling us, well, yes, you have your own national characteristics, and that's fine, but it's no reason to compete with each other to get into oblivion, to destroy yourselves. Find ways to cooperate.
That power aspect has a lot to do with it too. They like that power.
Absolutely. And nowadays, it's not just governments and the military. In 1961, it was President Eisenhower, who warned against the establishment of a military-industrial complex. The defense industry basically dictating government policy, not just in the United States, but in governments in countries around the world, in order to keep wars going on so that they could continue to make profits on people killing each other. And unfortunately, that's the sad truth today, that they are keeping the lid on what everything that has been found out, that is known, and controlling the public perception basically of the UFO phenomenon. It's sad. It's a sad state of affairs, but fortunately, morsels of fact and confirmations have come out over the years, and when you piece these together, the interesting fact emerges that George Adamski was correct on several fundamental levels when it comes to the reality of the extraterrestrial presence.
Mm-hmm. It's just incredible. It's very, very sad to think that it's something that doesn't have to be that way, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it.
Well, yes, we feel powerless and inadequate to act against these vested interests that have the economic power and the military power. But we shouldn't forget that we have help. First of all, we have our own responsibility. Either we go along with the government narrative of waving flags, shouting the word freedom at every occasion, as if other people do not want freedom. It's rather than seeking common ground. Many governments in the last 20, 30 years have been actively seeking conflict, and we see the same thing happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. But what we shouldn't forget that the visitors are here, and they've always been here. We see the old accounts in the Old Testament, several of which, many of which perhaps could be related to extraterrestrial visitors. The same for many other scriptures, the Hindu scriptures and indigenous traditions. So they've always been here, but especially since the Second World War and the invention of the atomic bomb, nuclear fission technology, the visitors have been here in greater number than ever in order to warn us against the dangers, and also to inspire us, to help us expand our understanding of life and our place on this planet and in the universe, to help us expand our understanding of how we are not separate individuals, powerless in the face of some anonymous authority or government behind the scenes. But we are interconnected at a very fundamental level, and science, and that's one of the chapters in my book in which I show that science nowadays has come to the same conclusion. It was postulated in the theosophical writings of Helena Blavatsky. That's one of the reasons why I mentioned her earlier, that life is interconnected. The human race is an integral part of the planet, and we cannot, with impunity, exploit and pollute and exhaust the resources of our home planet, which provides our habitat that we depend on for our livelihoods and for our life, for our breath. Nowadays, the extraterrestrial visitors told us the same things through the contactees, especially George Adamski. And nowadays, systems science, through quantum research and findings in many other scientific disciplines, show us exactly the same fact. Life is interconnected. It is unbroken. It is universal. It's, mainstream science, traditional science doesn't yet say it in so many words. But when you combine all these findings from different disciplines, the conclusion is, according to some very, very advanced thinkers, that life is universal. It's at the basis of the universe in which we live. It's fundamental. It's not a chemical accident in the backwaters of the Milky Way. We see life. We have been taught to see life as something that is carbon-based, and it's green when it's in the vegetable kingdom, so to speak, the grass and the trees and everything, and it moves in the animal kingdom, and it thinks in the human kingdom. But it's all interconnected. It's to do with the evolution of consciousness. Life is manifests itself through the evolution of consciousness, and that is the basic notion that we need to learn in this crucial time in our evolution. And when we realize that, we begin to see that we are powerful in the sense that we can direct our own future. We can make, it is our decision which way the human race will go. Will we continue on the old way, in the old way of competition, continued conflict, increased chaos and eventual destruction? Or will we seek cooperation and respect people with different viewpoints and come together to work for the greater good of a habitable planet and restoring the planet to health, so that we and our children and future generations will still have a planet to live on, and we will have the opportunity, as a planetary race, to join our brothers and sisters in space on our cosmic journey. We will leave behind this prison, this material prison of being, confined to this planet as we see it at the moment. And that's the expansion of consciousness at this time, that we are receiving help from the brothers and sisters from space, the space brothers, in a word, but also from our elder brothers, the people here on Earth who form the fifth kingdom in nature. The evolution of consciousness doesn't stop with the human kingdom. It's a continuous process. It doesn't stop. That's why many the contactees, the authentic contactees, all know and have heard and have shared the message that their contacts are much wiser and much more advanced in perception than the average human being on Earth. And on Earth also there is a group of people who have transcended the strictly human state of consciousness, and it's from this group, known as, in Christian terms, as the Kingdom of Souls, in more esoteric terms, excuse me, as the Masters of Wisdom. Oops. The Masters of Wisdom, And oops, my throat is not cooperating. It's back. We're back. These masters of wisdom are so, they have transcended the human state of consciousness, and they are a natural outcome of the evolution of consciousness on this planet and on every other planet. Adamski speaks of masters from Venus and Saturn that he met. Madame Blavatsky, in her work, introduced the idea of the masters of wisdom on our planet in her work in the late 19th century. So it's it's a natural. It follows naturally from the course of evolution, and these masters of wisdom who have they've always been here, except they have been active behind the scenes, so to speak, since the destruction of the continent of Atlantis. And at this time, they are in the process of returning to full view, so that we, average humanity, will be aware of what is ahead of us and what lies in front of us if we make the right choice. So we are not without help, even though we may feel powerless at the moment, especially with the violence and the conflicts going on at this time. But it is part of this very difficult time for humanity, where we have to make that crucial choice, and the responsibility is ours.
That it's really, really important that we educate and continue to do so. So that more people can wake up to the reality of what's going on in the world. It's still that good versus evil.
Yes.
And evil is very powerful. And it's frightening.
Yes.
But
yeah. You could also see it in terms of spiritual versus material. We need to learn that we are not just the material aspect of who we are and how we live, the thing that we see in the mirror. We have a spiritual aspect that informs our being and that evolves over the course of many incarnations. We do not get just one life, and that's the one chance that you have to reach enlightenment, for instance, or to manifest Christ consciousness. That's impossible, at least for most people.
Visitors, did they say what happened to Atlantis?
Not. Well, they mentioned, they referred to it, but Atlantis, according to the Ageless Wisdom teachings, which was first reintroduced to the world through Madame Blavatsky and later elaborated on by other people, such as Alice Ann Bailey and Helena Rearick and some other writers. Atlantis was the preceding cycle in human history, and it was destroyed in several phases through great floods, and we see accounts of the Great Flood in all the traditions, mythologies around the world. So that is what happened. They reached a very high point of scientific and technological achievement and civilization, but it came to be misused. And the technology that they developed was not developed by, in our current world. It's already kind of a united effort of scientists and people with the ability to put scientific understandings and insights into things that we can use and make our lives easier with. Technological know-how, etc., and make products out of that. The technology in Atlantis was, as it's called, a gift from the gods, and the gods in this case were the philosopher kings of the time. They were the masters of wisdom who ruled the masses, you know, they it was a society, a civilization that where magic was very common. And magic is not something paranormal, but magic is really a greater understanding of life and the laws of nature, the laws of life. So a true magician is able to manipulate the energies underlying the material reality that we see around us. So a magician could make objects appear, for instance, or disappear, you know, just to give a simple example. And these masters of wisdom at the time, the philosopher kings that ruled Atlantis, they withdrew when the masses gradually began to, or some factions began to misuse the magical powers. And you know, it became too dangerous to let that continue, apparently. So the populations at large and the civilization, I should say, was destroyed through these great floods. But you know, new colonies had been set up on other parts of the globe where new continents were being formed.
Interesting.
So, you know, that's where, that's how we see the occurrence of pyramids all over the globe. Those were created by in the colonies that were set up by the Atlanteans.
I always wondered that. Now, how did George Adamski come to meet the visitors?
It's interesting because people accuse him of getting on the UFO, or the flying saucer as it was called at the time, bandwagon, because that's where the money was to be made. Well, he never made any money of his on his efforts. Even in 1938, in the 1930s, he worked as a metaphysics teacher. He was active as a metaphysics teacher in Laguna Beach, California. And he had a property there that was bought by one of his benefactors, rather big property. And it was set up as a temple where students could gather. They could even, you know, there were rooms, there was a lecture hall, and there were meetings several times a week, and he taught there. And that he started this teaching in the 1920s, second half of the 1920s, established his community in Laguna Beach in 1934, and continued there until 1940. But already in 1938, he was gifted a telescope, the same telescope that is very well known in photographs of Adamski with his 6-inch telescope. That telescope was gifted to him in 1938. And a report in the Los Angeles Times said that it was installed to increase the public's interest in astronomy and space. About 8 years later, he wrote a pamphlet, The Possibility of Life on Other Planets. This was 1946. My personal suspicion is that he was aware of, and perhaps had even conscious contacts with visitors from space about which he wasn't supposed to talk. But his official first contact happened in November 1952, November the 24th, 1952. He had already taken several photographs of spacecraft in the 1940s, in the early years of the 1950s, 1950, 1951, through his telescope. And in November 24th, 1952, on a hunch, he and 6 of his co-workers and students in 2 cars set out into the California desert towards the Coxcomb Mountains. And at one point they parked the cars by the side of the road for a picnic. And around noon, they spotted a cigar-shaped craft, several of which had been reported before. And this one was also seen by the military, and it was entered as special report number 14 in the Project Blue Book, which was collecting all kinds of sightings on behalf of the government or the military in order to explain them away. But so it was seen. Adamski and his group saw this, what he calls a mothership, and they saw smaller scout craft coming, the flying saucers coming out of the mother craft. And apparently one of these craft landed in the nearby foothills, and Adamski went over to inspect, to explore, and he was in awe when he saw the saucer hovering over the surface of the Earth nearby as he approached. And as he was in wonderment about seeing this craft from outer space up close, he suddenly realized he was in the presence of a man standing a bit further away, and he began to engage with this man first through gestures and telepathic exchange, and understood that this was a visitor from Venus.
Where were his students at the time? You said they all went together.
They stayed by the cars at the side of the road. He was clearly the person who was meant to be contacted, and
I see.
yes, and they stayed by the side of the road by the cars, but they were able to see from a distance what was going on. They saw him speak to this man. Yes.
So they saw him speaking to the man. And you say the gentleman was a visitor? Is that how I'm interpreting? He was a visitor, and you say he was from Venus.
Yes. Well, Adamski was told, understood from their exchange that he's from Venus. He was from Venus, yes.
I see. And so they're not the only ones. There are other visitors from other planets.
Yes. On that occasion, he saw only one person, and I think he saw someone move around the flying saucer. And it was a couple of months later, from February 1953, that's when his second contact happened. He was asked to join them, and he got into a car with some of the visitors who looked very much, identical to earthly human beings, and they drove into the desert, where he was invited on board a flying saucer, and that was his first. First trip on a flying saucer into space.
So he was clearly selected as somebody that they wanted to make contact with.
Yes. They select the people that they know, will be open to the experience and perhaps willing to share their experience, because they're also aware that when you start talking about these things, people will ridicule you and if not worse. On that occasion and the later occasions, he met people from not only from Venus, but also from Mars and Saturn, Jupiter, and other planets. So, yes.
Did he express what they look like?
Oh, yes, he gave very specific descriptions. He described the visitors, the human beings from other planets, as very much like human beings. He never used the term Nordic. That's something that was used later
I see.
By later writers, not contactees necessarily. And according to his description, they looked like human beings, but much more refined and perfected in terms of physical appearance, youthful, And they all had their own characteristics. They didn't look all uniform or anything. He saw people, of different skin colors, short and tall, same kinds of differences that we find on our planet, but always more refined and of greater advancement in terms of physical appearance.
You mentioned anomalous materials that came from UFOs. What do you mean by that?
Are you referring to the physical bits of? On that, I believe that was on his when he was first invited to join them on a flying saucer. Well, as he was walking up to the saucer, the person that he gave his contacts, his regular contacts, names. They don't use names the way we do, but he gave them names in order to be able to write about them in his books. And the person that he called Aartsen was just coming out of the saucer to empty a crucible into the desert sand, saying that he just fixed a small part of the ship that had broken down, and emptying the crucible of the excess material, metal. Adamski, curious as he was, picked it up. It was not too hot to handle, and kept them. These pieces of metal, had them analyzed also.
I was going to ask that.
Yes, he had them analyzed. He gave a piece to Desmond Leslie, who was the co-author of Flying Saucers Have Landed. And Desmond Leslie, an Anglo-Irishman, novelist, and aristocrat. Very, very interesting and funny character. But also very serious, because he was the first to write a historical overview of extraterrestrial visitations and UFO sightings. And that was the first part of the book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. And Adamski's experience was appended to it. And that book came out in 1953, and that made Adamski's name worldwide. It was translated in no less than 10 languages within the first 4 years of its appearance, and reprinted in the United States no less than 12 times in the first 3 years. So there was Flying Saucers Have Landed. How did I get to mention that?
We were talking about the metal pieces.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you what ended up happening to those metal pieces too.
Desmond Leslie had these was given one of these pieces by Adamski and had it analyzed in the UK. And Adamski later he received the results, but he was not allowed to publish them. He was not allowed to publish them in his next book, Inside the Spaceships.
Peculiar.
Yes. And he said what UK government restricts, the US government restricts. It's part of the cover-up, of course.
Yep, they shut him down.
And now the interesting thing is that after the Pentagon's admission that the infrared captures of UAPs, as they call them, that were first leaked through the New York Times, when these were confirmed by the Pentagon in 2020, not long afterwards, a Stanford professor, Gary Nolan, came out saying that he was analyzing anomalous materials. And some of these were shown in the program that he was interviewed on. And they look very similar to the pieces that Adamski was showing in a photograph in 1954. And of course, Professor Nolan is not allowed to share all of his findings.
Where he got it from.
Yes. He also said that he had much bigger pieces that he was asked to analyze and research. except he couldn't show those due to national security sensitivities. So, there's another instance where Adamski's information is now being confirmed through more official channels. So, of course, nobody is saying Adamski was right. It's me putting these pieces of information together.
Sure. That makes sense, though.
Yes.
And what is meant by a new paradigm?
New paradigm. Yes. I actually touched a bit on that earlier on. See, our current paradigm, the original Old Greek, in original Old Greek, paradigm means pattern. It's the way you look at life or look at the world. So, and we do that in a certain pattern in which we have been raised and in which we've grown up in our civilization, in our world. And our current paradigm, as I've analyzed in one of the chapters in my book, is based on the sense of separation. It is based on the sense of individualism, which has become extreme. And as an example, I say if we could step back from the way we look at life, for instance, if we could get on a space flight, like Edgar Mitchell, who came back from his mission to the moon in when was it, 71 or 74? I don't remember. And he saw from the cockpit of the Apollo craft returning from the moon back to Earth. He saw this panorama of the surface of the moon and the blue planet Earth and the sun somewhere. He saw, and he had this epiphany of the oneness of creation and the oneness of life. Now, if we could step back for a minute and get on a space flight to look at our evolution, our growth in the past 2,000 years, perhaps we would see that we have grown to a certain extent out of the herd mentality that people 2,000 years ago were seeing, through which they were seeing the world at the time. And if you look at the stories in the New Testament, where Jesus of Nazareth was challenging the authorities of his time, the religious authorities of his time, and basically telling people, you need to think for yourselves. We have our own responsibility. And being so, we have our individual responsibility, and we need to learn to think for ourselves. And I think that's what those particular episodes in the New Testament tell us. And also his willingness to die for this ideal, and also the willingness of his disciples and many who followed to die for their ideal, was the seed for the other characteristic that has built the current paradigm. So individuality on the one hand, and idealism on the one hand. And these, every cycle, every cosmic cycle gives new characteristics to humanity that we need in our evolution, that will bring us forward. But at the end of every cycle, such characteristics tend to crystallize, and they get in our way. Now, if we look at these characteristics of individuality and idealism in, let's say, the last 50 years, the characteristic of idealism had its climax in the global fight between capitalism and communism. And the general perception is that communism lost and capitalism has won, and that's the best system for this world. Except it isn't, because millions of people are living in slavery due to capitalism. Millions of people are dying in conflicts due to capitalism. And that's because capitalism promised freedom communism promised justice, and of course, neither of these work in isolation without the other. They only work in conjunction. So after the fall of the communist system, individuality has become a kind of individualism, and this has turned into an excuse, it seems almost, for people, so that individual responsibility is now seen as justification to take for yourself, as much as you can, with no regard of other people's needs. So here we have these crystallized characteristics that we have acquired in the past 2,000 years, and which we need to take forward. We need not get rid of individuality or idealism, but we have to put them at the use to build and contribute to the greater good. We now have to make that shift from seeing ourselves as individuals as individuals who are part of a greater whole, of a planetary race, and we are all responsible for contributing our individual talents and our individual potential to build a better society, a better world, a better civilization for everyone, not just for ourselves. And this is the paradigm shift that I'm talking about. Yeah. So the old paradigm is based on individuality and idealism, and we're now living through the time where they have sort of married and become obstacles in the way we look at life, and it seems it's as if we cannot see beyond. But that's part of this fascinating and very important time in history, where we are forced, our crystallized way of looking at the world and at life is forcing us at the moment to make that choice, that decision. Are we going to continue in the old way, or will we decide to move forward in a different direction with the good of all in mind, and treating others the way we ourselves want to be treated, realizing that we are part of a planetary race of brothers and sisters. We are even part of a cosmic race of brothers and sisters that most people are not even aware of. And that's the choice before us now. And that is going to be decided based on whether or not we manage to make that paradigm shift, to change our paradigm, the way we look at life, the way we look at the world. And that is why it is so important to have the help of these space brothers and our own elder brothers, the Masters of Wisdom, to inspire us and to show us that there's more to life than just the material things that we have to worry about now. There's millions of people who do not even have access to basic things like clean water. And it's very easy to make sure that everyone would have access to clean water and medication and education and shelter and enough food, because the world is plentiful. There's an abundance of food and there's no shortage. If there's a shortage, it's because it's been manipulated by economic powers. And we have to see that we have a responsibility to put everything that we have, that this world produces, that we produce with our intellect, and put that at the use, make it available to use for all of humanity, every man, woman, and child, all of our brothers and sisters, and our children.
Well, this has been very enlightening. Can you please tell the listeners the name of your book, of where they can find it?
Yes, please, of course. My book is titled The Adamski Book of UFO UAP Disclosure. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other online bookshops. Subtitle is Early Evidence and Answers Now Confirmed by Science, Philosophers, Activists, and the Military. Yeah, and it's available online. If you look up the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, it should pop up.
And what are your plans ahead? Are you writing any more books?
Yes, I don't have. Well, I'm as I mentioned, I'm going to work. I haven't started yet, but I'm going to work on a revised and enlarged edition of my very first book, which will be I would say, the most comprehensive book about George Adamski's life and mission. The first edition is still available secondhand. People will, I'm sure, it can be found secondhand. But it will be there will be an enlarged and revised edition. I can't tell you when it will be published, because I have to start working on it. I've just finished this one, yeah, I find it stunning to see the confirmations that I found of George Adamski's information, and I see it as a monument to his legacy.
A good homage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you have a website also, Gerard, that people can refer to?
Yes, my website as a writer is bgapublications.nl, and people can find information there about my previous books and interviews that are coming up, or that I've done, or talks that I would be giving. And I also have a website about George Adamski.
Okay.
The Adamski case with hyphens, the-Adamski-case.nl, with a interesting illustrated biographical timeline and comprehensive brief overviews of his teachings and his mission and the impact of his work.
Illustrations are good. People love pictures and photographs and
of course,
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what are your final words to listeners? What do you want to leave them with?
There's every reason to be hopeful for the future. These visitors from space are not here to present us with some paranormal enigma to keep us wondering what's going on. They are here with a very clear mission of helping us see life in a broader perspective. And they are here in support of a momentous event in the evolution of humanity, in the expansion of our consciousness, where we will see and physically experience that there's an endless path of evolution lying ahead of us, and that will open ahead of us if we make the right choice. And part of the Ageless Wisdom tradition is that every cycle is inaugurated by a new teacher, which historically in mythology we know, like by names as Hermes and Hercules and Buddha and Krishna and Christ. And this new cycle that is beginning now will also be inaugurated by one of the Masters of Wisdom as the teacher for the new age, the world teacher. And this teacher is not going to save the world. It's our responsibility to clean up the mess that we've made. But these teachers, the world teacher and the Masters of Wisdom and the Space Brothers, with all their wisdom and advanced technology, are here at our disposal to help us go forward on the path of return to the source.
Let's hope we get there.
I'm sure we will.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to you listeners, if you like listening to this week's episode and you're into paranormal, check out my other show, Eleanor Wagner's Freaking It Real podcast, out of Coast to Coast Entertainment Network, which is available wherever you get podcasts. And if any of you are interested in reading any of my books, You can find the links to them on my website, authoreleanorwebster.com. I write about the history of the town and location, add the paranormal story to tips, and finish it all up with photos and evidence. Everybody loves a good ghost story, but there's nothing better than a true ghost story. Thank you so much.